Simone Weston was 36 years old when the judge handed her ex-husband the house, both cars, primary custody of their two daughters, and a narrative so clean and complete that her own family wasn't sure what to believe. For 11 years, she had been a wife, a mother, a caretaker of a household so well run that visitors commented on it, and Craig accepted the compliments without deflection. She had spent 6 of those 11 years getting up at 5:15 a.m. to pack lunches before anyone else was awake. 2 lunches, color-coordinated containers, because Nia needed things organized, and Camille needed them pretty. Making breakfast and checking homework folders and managing pediatric appointments and school fundraisers and the slow accumulation of invisible work that holds a household together without ever appearing on any financial statement, in any column, anywhere. She had worked part-time as a pastry consultant for 3 catering companies across the Atlanta metro in the hours the girls were at school, earning between $400 and $2,100 a month, depending on the season, and Craig had described this income to his colleagues more than once and in her presence as her hobby money. She drove a 2014 Kia Sorento with a cracked rear bumper she had been meaning to fix since 2017. She clipped coupons from the Sunday Circular. She froze bread when it went on sale. Her daughters called her mama in the way that means the person who is always there, and she had never once failed to be there, not once in 11 years. Craig's attorney spent 4 days in Fulton County Family Court describing Simone as financially unstable, emotionally erratic, and this was the phrase the attorney used with a particular casualness that Simone would carry in her chest for months, unsuitable as a primary custodial presence. It had text messages, selectively edited, stripped of context, arranged into a pattern they did not actually form. It had a financial record showing her part-time consulting income of $1,700 per month against Craig's $180,000 annual salary, presented without any acknowledgement of why her income was $1,700 per month, which was that she had organized her professional life around the children's schedules at Craig's explicit request across multiple years of the marriage, reducing her hours, turning down full-time opportunities, building her professional contributions around his. He had a character witness, a woman from their former neighborhood. O had known Simone for 8 months and Craig for 15 years, and described Simone's parenting, when asked by Craig's attorney, as sometimes distracted. The phrase sometimes distracted applied to a woman who had not missed a single school pickup in 6 years, stood in that courtroom and was allowed to stand. The judge awarded Craig the house, a 4-bedroom in Decatur that Simone had repainted 3 rooms of herself, whose backyard garden she had maintained since the year Nia was born. Both vehicles, including the Sorento, and primary physical custody of Nia, age 9, and Camille, age 7. Simone was given every other weekend and Wednesdays. Craig's attorney described the arrangement as being in the children's best interests. Simone looked at the table in front of her and kept her face still. She had no idea that in 22 months, she would be standing in a parking lot in Midtown Atlanta with a spatula in her hand and a line of 60 people stretching around the corner. And that the moment Craig Weston saw her face on the screen of his television, something in him would finally understand the scope of what he had thrown away. What happened in those 22 months? Nobody but Simone could have made happen. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 5:20 a.m. on a Monday in March, 11 days after the final divorce decree was entered. Simone was already awake. She had been awake since 4:07, which was when she had stopped pretending that sleep was something that was going to happen. She lay still for a few minutes after the alarm, looking at the ceiling of her mother's spare bedroom, the room that had been her childhood bedroom and still had the shadow of a glow-in-the-dark star on the ceiling above the door that her mother had never fully scraped off. She got up. She made the bed with the automatic tidiness of a woman who has made beds for 11 years as part of a routine larger than herself. She went down to the kitchen. Her mother, Gloria, was already at the stove. The smell of eggs and toast reached Simone at the foot of the stairs. Gloria Osei, née Weston, remarried in 2004. A woman who had spent 61 years converting difficulty into forward motion without making a production of it. Set a plate in front of Simone without ceremony and sat down across from her with her own coffee. They ate without talking for a few minutes. The kitchen had the particular warmth of a room that has been cooked in for 40 years. The warmth that accumulates in walls and cabinets, and the worn edge of the linoleum near the stove, where Gloria had stood making meals since 1989. The morning birds were beginning. Outside, down the hall, the spare bedroom, Simone's old room, converted 3 years ago into a craft room, but still containing the bunk beds Gloria had kept on the implicit understanding that grandchildren might one day need them. Add 2 suitcases in it that Simone had packed in 20 minutes at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning 11 days earlier. After reading the decree through it twice and understanding that there was no version of staying in that house that was survivable with her dignity intact. Her daughters were at Craig's house. The Sorrento was in Craig's driveway. The house, the 4-bedroom in Decatur she had painted and planted and organized and run as a household for 9 years, was Craig's house on paper now, which meant it was Craig's house in fact. The joint accounts had been settled. Her personal account, the one she had maintained through the marriage on her consulting income, held $4,200.17. She had 1 box of documents, 2 suitcases, and a mother who had turned on the porch light and left it on without being asked. Everything she had contributed to building for 11 years was on the other side of a court order. She had not had the money to fight it as aggressively as Craig had. That was true. And she had accepted it as true. And she had decided that the most useful thing she could do with that truth was move forward into the next true thing, rather than continue to face backward into something she could not change. "What do you need today?" Gloria said. Simone looked at her coffee. "I need a job. You have skills. I need income." Gloria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What would you do if money wasn't the first question?" Simone looked at her mother. She knew what her mother was doing. She also knew that her mother was not wrong. "Cook." Simone said, "I'd cook." Gloria nodded once, the way she nodded when the answer she expected arrived on schedule. She picked up her coffee. She said, "Then we start there." Simone had been cooking her whole life and had been doing it professionally in the part-time and informal ways that don't appear on resumes but constitute real expertise. Since she was 22, she had trained for a year under a pastry chef named Henri Dupont at a catering company in Buckhead before Craig had suggested gently and then less gently that the hours weren't compatible with the family they were building. She had transitioned to part-time consulting, recipe development, event day support, production guidance for corporate caterers who needed someone who understood both flavor and volume. She knew how a sauce broke under heat and how to fix it. She knew how to develop a recipe that could scale from 8 portions to 800 without losing its integrity. She knew how to run a kitchen line under pressure without losing anyone or anything. These were not decorative skills. They were the kind of skills that produce a revenue when pointed in the right direction. The direction took 3 weeks to become clear. She looked at brick-and-mortar opportunities and dismissed them. The startup capital was prohibitive and the timeline too long. She looked at catering company positions and found one that was real but would not cover childcare and transportation and still leave anything for an attorney when she was ready to revisit the custody arrangement. She sat at her mother's kitchen table one evening with a legal pad and a pen and wrote down what she could actually do with $4,200, which was the sum total of what remained in her personal savings account after the divorce costs. She wrote, "Food truck." She crossed it out. She wrote it again. She stared at it for a long time. She called her best friend Keisha the next morning at 7:45. Keisha Monroe had known Simone since the 7th grade and operated on the specific frequency of someone who has watched a garçon they love be diminished for years and has been waiting with the patience of someone who understood the timing wasn't theirs to control. For the moment, the diminishment stopped. "A food truck," Keisha said. "I know how it sounds." "It sounds correct," Keisha said. "What do you need?" "I need to know if $4,200 can get me to a first service." Keisha was quiet for 4 seconds. "Come over this weekend. Bring the legal pad." The business case took Keisha and Simone 11 days to build and 3 more days to pressure test. A USET food truck, in operational condition, could be sourced in the Atlanta metro for between $18,000 and $32,000, depending on age and equipment. A commercial kitchen commissary license in Fulton County ran $1,800 annually. A mobile food vendor permit was $475. The gap between $4,200 and a functional operation was real but not insurmountable if you were creative about the capital structure. Keisha contributed $6,000 from a savings account she described as her emergency fund and noted, without drama, that this qualified. Simone's mother contributed $4,500. Keisha's cousin Raymond, who had worked in commercial equipment for 14 years, located a 2008 Chevy step van with a 6-burner range, a commercial griddle, a working exhaust hood, and a refrigeration unit that needed a new compressor but was otherwise sound. The purchase price was $16,200. Raymond negotiated it to $14,800 and installed a new compressor himself over a weekend in exchange for a standing order of Simone's brisket for 6 months, which he said was the better deal and meant it. The truck did not have a name for the first 9 days of its existence as Simone's property. She washed it, repainted the exterior herself with Keisha's help over 2 Saturdays, and reconfigured the interior layout so the prep station was where she needed it, and the service window faced the right direction for a right-handed operator working a solo line. She spent 4 mornings testing and refining the menu. 8 items, nothing more. Chosen because each one was something she had made hundreds of times and could execute in under 4 minutes under pressure without compromising the result. Smoked brisket tacos with a pickled red onion she made herself. Shrimp and grits with the andouille cream sauce she had been perfecting since 2009. Fried catfish po' boy with a remoulade that was her grandmother's and not available anywhere else. A rotating seasonal special that used whatever was freshest at the State Farmers Market on Murphy Avenue, where she went every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. On the 9th day, she was sitting in the truck's cab in the commissary parking lot, eating a test batch of the po' boy at 7:15 in the evening with the service window open and the late light coming through it. And she was thinking about the menu board design, which needed a typeface that was legible from 15 feet in mixed light. And she was also thinking about her mother standing at the stove that first Monday morning with the porch light already on and the eggs already made, waiting without making it a production. And the two thoughts arrived at the same time in the way that conclusions sometimes do when you have been circling them for long enough. She named the truck Gloria. Her mother was quiet for 4 seconds on the phone when Simone told her. Then she cried, briefly, completely, in the way of someone who does not cry easily and therefore means it without reservation when they do. She composed herself in approximately 40 seconds and said it was a very good name for a food truck and that they needed to decide on the lettering immediately because the first service was in 2 weeks and good lettering took time to do correctly. The first service was a Tuesday in May, 11 weeks after Simone had moved into the spare bedroom with 2 suitcases. She parked the truck on the corner of Edgewood and Boulevard, in Inman Park, a location she had scouted over 3 weeks by counting foot traffic at 45-minute intervals on weekdays and comparing it to 2 other sites she had identified. She arrived at 9:30 a.m. to set up. Service started at 11 o'clock. At 10:58, Keisha appeared from around the corner with a folding table, a handwritten menu sign, and an expression of absolute confidence that Simone found more fortifying than anything else could have been. The first customer arrived at 11:04. By noon, Simone had served 22 people. By 1:30, she was sold out. She had brought product for 40 portions. She had sold 38. She sat in the driver's seat after the window closed with her hands in her lap and looked at the empty prep line through the service window pass-through. Her feet hurt. Not the ordinary standing too long hurt, but the deep muscular ache of 6 hours of movement that included lifting, bending, and a specific rotating motion at the shoulder that she had not trained her body for yet. She had made $487 in 2.5 hours of service on a Tuesday on a corner in Inman Park in a truck that was 8 months older than the iPhone in her pocket. She counted the cash and reconciled it against the card reader total in the notebook she kept in the passenger seat. The numbers matched. They always had to match. That was a rule she had made for herself on the first day and intended to maintain forever. Because she had seen what happened to food businesses when the operator stopped knowing exactly where every dollar was. She wrote the number at the bottom of the page. She wrote the date beside it. She sat for another moment. It was not enough to live on. She knew that. It was not going to be enough for several more months, which was also something she knew and had accounted for in the financial model she had built on the legal pad with Keisha over those 11 days. She had projected a break-even point at month 4. She had a reserve plan that got her to month 6 if the projection was wrong. She was running the business on real numbers, not hope, which was the difference between people who made it and people who didn't. And she had known that since she was 22 years old, training under Henry DuPont and watching him reconcile his books with a focus that matched his focus over a saucepan. It was real. It was hers. Nobody had given it to her, and nobody could take it back. That was the part that mattered. That was always the part that mattered. The first 2 months were the hardest, not because of failure. The truck did not fail, not once, not in any service she ran, but because of the math of building something from nothing while also being a mother every other weekend and every Wednesday, which meant that 48 hours of every 14 days were not available for the work. And every hour she was not with her daughters. She was either on the truck or preparing for it or lying in bed running the numbers until she fell asleep. She woke at 4:45 on service days to start the brisket, which required a 4-hour low and slow that could not be rushed and could not be cheated and could always be tasted if you tried to do either. She cleaned the truck after every service herself top to bottom because she could not yet afford to pay someone else to do it, and because she had standards that did not bend under exhaustion. The cleaning alone took 40 minutes. She did it after a 6-hour service shift. She did it every time. She had $200 in operating reserve at the end of month one after product costs and the commissary fee, which was not a comfortable margin and which she knew precisely because she tracked every dollar in a notebook she kept in the passenger seat of the Accord, handwritten, updated after every service. She knew her cost per plate to the cent. She knew her break-even volume. She knew exactly how many portions of shrimp and grits she needed to sell on a given day before the truck was profitable for that service. That knowledge was the thing that kept the anxiety functional rather than paralytic. Not optimism, not confidence in the abstract, but arithmetic. The numbers were real. She knew how to work with real things. She fell asleep most nights before 10 and was up before 5 and did not complain to anyone except Keisha on the phone on Sunday evenings, which was the 1 hour in 7 days she allowed herself to be tired out loud. By month 3, she had 3 regular lunch spots, in Man Park Tuesdays, Pond City Market adjacent Thursdays, and the Tech campus in Midtown that had added her to its rotating vendor roster after a facilities manager ate the shrimp and grits on a Thursday and came back the following Monday with his entire department. By month 4, she had a Saturday morning farmers market slot in Decatur that filled her capacity in 90 minutes and generated a waiting list she started managing by text message. By month 5, she had hired one part-time employee, a culinary school student named Deja, who arrived on time, worked hard, and could run the griddle without supervision by her second week. By month 6, the truck had a following, not a social media following in the manufactured sense, but the real kind, built one person at a time. The way reputation builds when the product is genuinely good and the person behind it does not cut corners. A food writer for a local culture magazine ate the catfish po' boy on a Thursday in October and posted 4 sentences about it that were specific enough to be believed. A chef who owned 2 restaurants in the Old Fourth Ward ate the brisket tacos at the Decatur market and asked if she had considered wholesale production and then said, "I'm asking for a reason," and gave her his card. His name was Marcus Bell. He had trained in New Orleans and worked in New York and come home to Atlanta in 2018 to open a restaurant he called Tallow, which had received serious attention from the kind of publications that give serious attention. He wanted the pickled red onion for his brisket service. He wanted the remoulade for a catfish dish he was developing. He wanted to talk about a production agreement. Simone sat in Tallow's quiet dining room on a Tuesday afternoon in November, across from Marcus Bell, with a legal pad and a pen. The dining room smelled of good wood and cedar smoke. She was wearing clothes she had not worn since before the marriage ended. She had the pen between her fingers, and she did not fidget with it. "I'm not interested in selling the recipes," she said. Marcus nodded. "I'm not asking for the recipes. I'm asking for the product. A standing weekly order. You produce it in your commissary, deliver it to us, and we serve it. Your name on the menu item." She looked at him. My name, Simone's pickled onion, Simone's remoulade. That's what the menu says. She wrote a number on the legal pad and turned it to face him. He looked at it. He wrote a different number below it. The difference was $180 per week. She wrote a number between the two. He looked at it for 6 seconds and said yes. She drove home to her mother's house in a 2006 Honda Accord she had bought 3 months earlier for $6,400 cash. Reliable, nothing notable. She could park it anywhere, and sat in the driveway for a moment with the engine off and looked at the house with its kitchen light on and the shadow of her mother moving past the window inside. 11 months. She had started with $4,200 and a legal pad. The truck was averaging $3,100 per week in gross revenue by month 8. After commissary fees, product costs, Dacia's hours, and the Marcus Bell standing order added in as a separate revenue line, she was netting just over $2,200 per week, more than her part-time consulting income had ever been, more than Craig's attorney had told the court she was capable of producing. She had moved out of her mother's spare bedroom and into a 2-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta with a kitchen large enough to prep in when the commissary wasn't available, and a second bedroom that Nia and Camille had chosen and decorated themselves, Nia with a string of LED lights along the ceiling edge, and Camille with a series of drawings taped to the wall above her bed that included 3 portraits of a food truck. She was working with a family law attorney named Patricia Anand to reopen the custody arrangement. Patricia handled high-conflict parenting cases out of a 3rd-floor office on Peachtree Road. Had 22 years of experience and had reviewed the original Weston proceedings with an expression that conveyed her professional assessment without requiring words. The financial stability documentation was already substantially different from what had been presented to the Fulton County Court 18 months earlier. Patricia was building a motion for modification. They were moving carefully. Craig Weston had noticed none of this in real time. He received the child support payments Simone made on schedule, noted them arrive, and moved on. He saw her every other Friday afternoon at his front door, standing next to the Accord with its unpretentious profile, in clothes that were clean and appropriate but not new. And each time I saw her, he processed her through the same assessment and reached the same conclusion. She was not a threat, and she was not relevant. And whatever she was doing in the weeks, he didn't see her was consistent with the picture he had built of who she was without him. He had told Whitney that Simone was struggling. He had said it with the particular tone of a man confirming a prediction he'd already made. Whitney had nodded and said that was too bad and poured them both more wine. He had his house. He had his life. He had primary custody, which he exercised adequately. The girls were fed, transported to school, and supervised by a combination of Craig and Whitney, and on the evenings, Craig had late meetings, a sitter he kept on retainer. He attended school events when they didn't conflict with his schedule. He was a functional custodial parent in the documented, observable sense. It was not the parent who knew that Nia needed her water bottle in the front zipper of her backpack, not the side pocket, or she'd forget it, or that Camille had started writing song lyrics in a notebook she kept under her pillow, or that both of them asked on Wednesday pickup afternoons before they even put on their seatbelts what Simone was making for dinner that night. He was not that parent. He was not paying attention to what that cost. The television segment aired on a Saturday in April, 22 months after the decree. It was a local segment, 7 minutes, on a morning show called Atlanta Weekend Live. The segment producer had found Simone through the Food Writer's article and had spent 3 weeks in correspondence before she agreed to an on-camera interview. The camera crew came to the truck on a Thursday service day and filmed the setup, the line, the cooking, the moment a customer got her first bite of the shrimp and grits and closed her eyes involuntarily in a way that cameras love and cannot manufacture. They interviewed Simone for 14 minutes and used 3.5 of them in the final edit. She talked about her daughters. She talked about her grandmother's remoulade. She talked about naming the truck after her mother. She did not talk about the divorce. The producer had asked. She had said, "That's not the story." The producer had agreed. Craig Weston was watching Atlanta Weekend Live that Saturday morning because it was the program that ran in the background while he made breakfast, avid from the marriage that he had simply not changed. Whitney was upstairs. The girls were with Simone for the weekend. He was at the kitchen counter of the house. His house, the house the court had given him, with the backyard garden he had not maintained since Simone left, and the 3 rooms she had repainted that he had not repainted since, making eggs, and heard the segment producer's voiceover say something about a food truck and a chef who had started with nothing. He glanced up. He saw the truck first. The name Gloria in clean white script on a dark blue panel, the letters precise and unhurried. Then the camera pulled back and he saw the line. 60 people stretching around the corner of the frame, a line that disappears off screen in the way of lines that are longer than the camera can hold. Then the service window, and Simone at it with a spatula in her hand, moving with the practiced economy of someone who has been doing this specific motion for a long time and does not waste a single second of it. He set down his spatula. The interview portion came up. Simone on a stool outside the truck, looking directly into the camera with a steadiness he recognized and had not seen directed at him in years. She talked about her grandmother's remoulade. She talked about naming the truck after her mother. She smiled when the producer asked her what it felt like to have a line around the block. And it was the real smile, the one that arrived before she could manage it. And he had not seen that smile in a very long time, and for a specific reason. He stood at the counter and watched the remaining 4 minutes of the segment. When it ended, he stood there in the kitchen for another 30 seconds. He did not know about the Marcus Bell standing order, about Simone's name on 2 dishes at one of the city's most serious restaurants. He did not know about the Decatur Market's 400-person waiting list, or the Tech Campus contract, or the Food Writers piece that had circulated in the specific networks where Simone was now known. He did not know about Patricia Anand's modification motion filed the previous Tuesday, built on 22 months of financial documentation that made the original trial record look like a different person's story. He did not know that Nia had asked, on a Wednesday pickup the week before, if her birthday party could be at the food truck, or that Camille had drawn the truck 8 times in the notebook she kept beside her bed at Simone's apartment. He did not know any of it. That was exactly the point. He picked up his phone. He set it down. He looked at the kitchen, the backyard visible through the window, the garden beds that had gone unattended for 22 months, the 3 walls she had painted colors he had not chosen and had never changed. He had won the house. He stood in it. He thought about the line of 60 people on the television screen, and something moved through his chest that he did not have a name for and did not try to find one. There was nothing to say. There was no version of this moment that did not arrive too late. The modification hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in June, in courtroom 3 billion of the Fulton County Courthouse, 3 floors above the family court office where the original decree had been entered. Simone arrived at 8:45 with Patricia Anand and a leather portfolio containing 22 months of documented financial records, 2 character statements, a school engagement record on both children, a housing inspection summary, and a declaration from Marcus Bell, who had not been asked, who had offered, describing the professional character and operational standards of Simone Weston in terms that were specific and direct and signed. Patricia laid the case in methodical sequence. The income documentation showed a consistent upward trajectory from $0 in month 1 to a net of $2,200 per week in month 18, now rising. The housing documentation showed a stable 2-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta that met and exceeded the court's minimum standards for the children's well-being. The children's own statements, taken by the guardian ad litem in a child-appropriate interview format, indicated a clear, strong, and healthy relationship with their mother and an expressed desire to spend more time with her. Craig's attorney, a different man from the original proceedings, tried 3 counter-arguments. All 3 were answered by documentation that Patricia had organized into labeled tabs and could locate in under 20 seconds. The income argument collapsed when Patricia produced 22 consecutive weeks of deposit records. The housing argument collapsed when she produced the inspection report. The character argument never found its footing. The modification was granted. Joint physical custody, alternating weekly. Simone sat in the courtroom chair and looked at the table when it was read, and did not allow her face to do anything that the room could misread. She was not performing composure. She simply had it. That was different. Outside the courthouse, on the wide stone steps, in the June morning, with Patricia folding documents back into her portfolio and the city going about its Tuesday below them, Simone stood for a moment in the sun with her face up. The modification order said joint physical custody, alternating weekly. It said both parents are recognized as providing stable and nurturing environments for the minor children. Each side, the arrangement was in the children's best interests, which was the same phrase Craig's attorney had used 22 months ago to describe an arrangement that left Simone with every other weekend, and which meant something completely different now, because the facts were different. Facts changed when you changed them. That was the only mechanism available, and she had used it. She thought about Nia's LED lights and Camille's drawings taped to the wall above the bed. She thought about the birthday party she was going to plan at the truck, with the brisket tacos and the shrimp and grits and the remoulade and the squeeze bottles she had designed a label for, white with clean dark lettering, the recipe from her grandmother's handwritten card that she had laminated and kept in the truck's prep drawer so it could never be lost. She thought about the morning in March she had sat at her mother's kitchen table with $4,200 and a legal pad and written food truck, and crossed it out and written it again. She had crossed it out because she was afraid. She had written it again because she was her mother's daughter and her grandmother's granddaughter, and there was more of that in her than there was of the fear. She called Gloria from the courthouse steps. Gloria answered on the second ring. Simone said it went well. She heard her mother take one long breath and release it. The specific sound of 22 months of held air, leaving a person who had been holding it since the morning Simone came home with 2 suitcases. Then Gloria said, "I'll make your grandmother's chicken tonight." And Simone said yes, and that was all that needed to be said between two people who understood each other completely. She did not think about Craig. There was no version of that territory that contained anything she needed. By the end of that fiscal year, the truck's gross annual revenue was $187,000. Net, after all costs, including Dacia's now full-time wage and a second part-time hire named Theo, who ran the farmer's market Saturdays, was $68,400. It was more money than Simone had earned in any year of her marriage. Marcus Bell had extended the standing order and added a third product, the pickled jalapeno compound butter she had developed for the seasonal special, and had begun introducing Simone to other chefs in the city with the specific purposefulness of someone who recognizes talent and considers its distribution a form of good work. 2 of those introductions had produced new wholesale inquiries. A third had produced an invitation to be a guest chef at a dinner series in the old Fourth Ward, which Simone had attended in her own clothes, introduced by her own name, and had cooked for 42 people who gave her a standing ovation that she accepted by removing her apron and folding it over her arm and saying thank you, which was all that needed saying. Patricia Anand filed the paperwork on the custody modification in late June. Craig signed it through his attorney without requesting a hearing. His attorney's note to Patricia said only that his client acknowledged the change in circumstances and did not contest the modification. That was the correct legal language. What it meant was simpler. He had seen the 60 people in line on the television screen. He had stood in his kitchen with the spatula in his hand and understood for the first time what he had been wrong about for 22 months. He did not know how to say so. He signed the paperwork instead. She drove the Accord back to the commissary after the courthouse, where Deja was already into the Thursday service prep. She put on her apron. She checked the brisket she had started at 4:45 that morning. Low and slow, the way it had to be, the way it could not be rushed or cheated. She tasted the remoulade and added a 1/4 teaspoon of lemon and tasted it again. It was right. She closed the warmer lid. She picked up her marker and began the daily prep log at the top of a fresh page. The date, the time, the weather outside, what was ready. The way she did every single morning before every single service. Her handwriting was even and clear and unhurried. The truck had been running for 22 months and had never missed a service. Neither had she. She did not look back. There was nothing back there that she needed. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.